I completely understand both sides of the issue, just like Ms. Sudbeck just pointed out. We all have heard both sides of the issues, and we all can sympathize with everybody on this issue on one side or the other. But I also see and hear the vast amount of misinformation being spread, and I just like to keep things factual, and has nothing to do with statistics or anything like that. It's just, for instance, our speaker tonight was misinformed about the mission and duties of the school board. Our duties and powers are listed in the code, and we are to see that school laws are properly explained, enforced, and observed. Someone said we were public policy makers, and that is nowhere in the Constitution. Our job is to ensure laws are being enforced by the administration. So we don't make public policy. Those are legislators. They're in the General Assembly. We're not tasked with that duty. Our other statement tonight that needs to be addressed in reference to the law is that went through the General Assembly. It passed the General Assembly vote and was signed into the law, Virginia 2021 Act, Chapter 456, that people are referring to Senate bill, but it did go through the process, and it is effective through 8/1/22. And the way to fight that law is to get it stricken or inactivated. The General Assembly is in session now. Go to the source. Contact your legislators. They can make changes. That's when they're in session. They're in session now. Now's the time to do that. Someone else mentioned that we are a local agency. We don't exist without the state. We are a state public education source. We only exist due to the state constitution. There's no mention of education in the federal constitution. We are entirely existent because of the state. So we can't function without the state. There can't be a local public school system under these guidelines. So just to get those things out there, I appreciate that people feel passionately that way, but that's just not in existence. The policy that I proposed at the last meeting, that I was in support of a parental opt-out option, is because I believe school board members do not make health decisions, and that was the whole point of it. It included the statement that the board will acknowledge that our policy will be modified based on any future state or federal orders, mandates, and legislation, and may require modification based on community spread rates. That was in the motion. And I thought and intended for that statement to allow for the mass policy to pivot with changing laws, mandates, and orders. We knew that was going to happen at some point. The governor gave us that, for the first time ever, the duty that it was up to us. And then 2 weeks later, he took that away. So the policy would allow for the administration to go back and forth with all these changes so that parents could apply the opt-out option whenever that was applicable. The fluidity of the policy is what I liked about the policy. But since then, we've been advised that because of the multiple changes that were made out of our control, including the governor's flip-flops twice, and the new policy will be made tonight because mine is invalid, evidently. So regarding the Spotsylvania County School Board, though, as a whole, we, at least most of us, are law-abiding. And we're not a radical board that allows politics or personal feelings to interfere with educating our kids. Parental involvement, student safety, and staff safety are all top priorities for a majority of us on the board, and that's why this issue hits home for so many of us on both sides. And we all feel strongly either way. I have never once stated, and I still have not stated, my preference for or against masks from this chair. I get accused of being on both sides. It's very interesting. I don't feel my opinion matters. I follow the law, and when applicable, and I need to apply, I apply, and I comply. For 2 weeks, the governor said my opinion mattered, but now it doesn't. The biggest point to make here is one I asked at 3 different stages throughout this process, and my biggest point to make is, will the insurance that we have to have cover us if we institute a policy that goes against the current law of the state? And the answer is not if we willfully defy the law. So this bill that was passed, as do most bills every session that I fight every year, transfers more and more power away from the localities and usually more to the state. But this one transfers power to the CDC. The state doesn't like leaving any power in the locality's hand. They didn't even transfer it to the VDH or to the VDOE. If you're going to argue whether or not masking is practicable, then boards could argue that 5 days per week in person isn't practicable with the CDC guidelines in place. It goes round and round and back and forth. Some people praise Governor Santos in Florida for threatening to withhold DOE money from the districts that mask. Well, the same could be said for Northam if he threatened to withhold funds from those divisions that didn't mask. The law and system works both ways. Ultimately, the governor granted the power to school boards to decide, and we did, and then he took that power away. The law of the land is now to follow CDC guidelines. The policy that's in place now allows for such pivots that are caused by state or federal mandates, but I guess it's not quite enough, and legal says we have to do more. Even if I felt a ruling for parental choice would hold up in court, I'd be willing to fight it. But since it clearly defies the law, I'm not willing to cut millions from an already bare bones budget to cover the challenge. To my fellow board members that support doing such a thing, I would like to know tonight, if you're interested in that, what are you willing to cut from the budget to cover the legal fees that will be associated with a policy contrary to CDC guidelines as stated in the recent law? The most recent case that I know of that a school board faced in Virginia took 5 years to settle, and the legal fees exceeded $10 million. So I want to know who's willing to motion their plans to cut our budget to pay for those expenses, and what are they willing to cut? Teacher pay, positions, transportation, sports programs, and how far are they willing to go to define practicable? I don't believe in excessive government mandates in any form, but this law is clear. The only one question remaining is how far are some of us willing to let this one issue go to derail the entire school year for 23,000 students? This time last year, I was outvoted, and we were beginning the school year virtual. We finally were able to have a full quarter of in-person learning before nearly a third of our staff was out on quarantine in 6 weeks, and we were forced to return to virtual learning. With no kids back at all yet this year, we have already quarantined staff. This is a big concern to me. Whether we have masks or not, as I said last school year, we must have staff to teach our kids. And if following the law keeps less staff on quarantine and our schools open because practicable applies both ways and keeps the tight budget funded, then we need to stand by the policy that's in place, and evidently we have to modify it more to reflect the CDC requirements and the state law.